Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Israel Brief, brought to you by Lay of the Land and hosted by me, Rolene Marks. And just a reminder that the Israel Brief brings you your top stories making headlines from Israel every Monday to Thursday. And before we get into the headlines, let me recap where you can find us online. Our website is at www.layoftheland.online. Our Facebook page is at Lartle Site, our YouTube channel at the Israel Brief, and our Twitter handle is at Lay of the Land with the digit 5. And it's a very somber day here in Israel, and this brings me to our top story, and I'm going to break it down in numbers for you. 4 people brutally murdered, 2 in moderate condition, 10 orphaned children, 8 minutes filled with terror. Yesterday, a terrorist in the southern Israel town of Beersheba both rammed and stabbed several people to death. All it took was 8 minutes, and I'm not going to mention his name because I'm not going to give him the notoriety that he and his supporters want, but all it took was for 8 minutes for the terrorist to start off his rampage at a gas station in Beersheba, brutally stabbing a woman to death. He continued to stab her when she was on the ground. He then got into his vehicle and rammed into one of the victims who was on his bicycle. He then continued his stabbing rampage, seriously wounding 2 others who subsequently passed away from their wounds and moderately wounding 2 more. I will, however, tell you the names of those who perished. Dorit Yabas, Rabbi Moshe Kravitsky, Laura Yitzchak, and Menachem Yeheskel. We remember their names, we will say their names, and we will hold their families close to our hearts and in our prayers. Now, yesterday, 2 brave passers-by managed to neutralize the terrorist. One was an Egged bus driver who was armed and tried to get the terrorist to drop his knife and said, "Drop your knife, drop your knife." The terrorist refused to and actually tried to stab him in turn. And you can actually view this footage. It is available online. And the bus driver opened fire, neutralizing the terrorist. He was also helped by another passerby who was armed. Now, there has been some controversy, some people saying or asking rather, why did the police take the weapons of the 2 passers-by? And the reason for this is pretty simple in its procedure. It is part of the law anytime a weapon is discharged for the police to take the weapon and investigate it. But yesterday, because of the extreme bravery of these 2 passers-by, the police chief gave the instruction for those weapons to be checked on site and returned to the brave men as soon as possible. The police chief gave the 2 passers-by who neutralized the terrorist a lift home with police escort as a show of thank you for helping to avert what could have been greater catastrophe. The Prime Minister and the President have both lauded the Egged bus driver, whose name is Arthur Chaimotz, for his incredible bravery. Now, what we do know about the terrorist is that he was an ISIS supporter, had served time in prison for recruiting for ISIS, and was working as a teacher and came from the Bedouin village of Hura. His family, speaking to the press, say he is in no way representative of them or their community and only is representative of himself. The Arab lawmakers in Israel, some from the Joint List and from the Ra'am party, have roundly condemned the attack, as well as lawmakers from all the other parties. This is the first time we've heard a condemnation of a terror attack from the Joint Arab List. And earlier today, members of the Beersheba Jewish community and Arab community sat down to talk about how to quell any possible violence. We are closely approaching the month of Ramadan. It is traditionally a time where we do see a significant uptick in violence and acts of terror. And this is not the first terror act that has taken place in a matter of days. This is the third terror attack in less than a week. One took place on Saturday when a jogger was out in Jerusalem and a Palestinian terrorist stabbed him. Thank goodness he is only in moderate condition, and 2 policemen were wounded in East Jerusalem as well. But yesterday was the first time we've seen a terror attack of this nature for a very long time happen in the southern city of Beersheba. It has sparked international condemnation. We've heard from the ambassadors of the United Kingdom, the United States and Australia to Israel condemning the attack. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, as well as the Department of State, have also condemned it. I haven't seen anything from the United Nations or the EU, but if I do, I will report that in an update. And the families are preparing to bury their loved ones at different times today. May their memories be blessed and their blood avenged. We now turn to the Ukraine, and yesterday we brought you the news that the Kochav Meir field hospital, named for Golda Meir, the only one of its kind opened by Israel, is operational and has been seeing patients. So what we do know is that included in the delegation of medical personnel are midwives, pharmacists, IT professionals, doctors, nurses, X-ray technicians. What is also quite extraordinary about this field hospital is that with incredible technology, doctors and nurses on the ground there, on site at the hospital, will be able to communicate with their colleagues in Sheba Hospital using the internet. This is quite an advancement in the field of combat medicine, so quite extraordinary. And the one thing we are starting to see is coverage of our field hospitals starting to make the mainstream media. The Daily Mirror in the United Kingdom giving it a coverage earlier today, taking an extraordinary look inside how just literally within days this was organized and went up, and the extraordinary methods of treatment inside the actual hospital. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, in an address to the Japanese parliament, excoriated the United Nations, saying that they were barely functioning and that there is need for reform. The Ukrainian president is doing his rounds of addressing the various parliaments around the world. Yesterday he addressed the parliament of Italy, also appealing to them for military aid. Just several days ago he addressed the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and earlier today the Japanese parliament. And he's also said that talks between, or negotiations between, Ukraine and Russia have reached significant difficulties. In other news, yesterday we brought you the story that Singapore is opening up an embassy in Israel for the first time in over 50 years, despite very strong bilateral relations. And the reason for this has been to respect the political sensitivities of their neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, two of the biggest Muslim countries or Muslim populated countries in the world. Now, what is extraordinary is news has broken that two Israeli parliamentarians, Avi Dichter and Nira Speck, have been in Indonesia. They attended the Interparliamentary Conference, which is the first time that Israeli parliamentarians have been in Indonesia, albeit with the Israeli flag present. Quite extraordinary if you consider that there are no diplomatic relations between the two countries. However, as we said to you yesterday, there have been murmurings that Indonesia could possibly be one of the next countries to consider normalization with Israel. Wouldn't that be just simply extraordinary? And we end this broadcast on a happy note, literally a happy note. Israel has been voted the 9th happiest nation in the world as per the World Happiness Index. This is an index that is released every year. This is the 10th year since its inception, and Israel has moved up from number 12 into the top 10, coming in at number 9, the happiest country in the world is Finland. And with the beautiful Aurora Borealis, I know other countries have that too, but with the beautiful sights and happy people of Finland, it's no wonder they are the world's leading country in happiness. But what is truly extraordinary is Israel's ranking at number 9, beating the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and various other countries. This despite Israel facing or enduring rather, a war that took place for 11 days last year between us and terror entities in the Gaza Strip, which goes to show that when we say Am Yisrael high, we really are. We're high on life and happiness. And that brings me to the end of today's broadcast. I want to thank you for watching. And just a reminder, I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, and I'll bring you your headlines tomorrow.